Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Ayin Hey. Today is Yom HaZikaron, and today's daf is dedicated to the memory of the fallen soldiers of the IDF and the security forces who fell in the defense of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, and to the memory of those whose lives were tragically lost in terrorist attacks. This year, we're especially thinking about those lost on and after October 7th. May their memories be blessed. We continue to pray for the safe and speedy return of our hostages. With that, we are going to get started with the bottom of Ayin Daled Amud Bet from the words Tanu Rabbanan. So we start with the Breiter. We're finishing up today's daf on Perek Ezu Nesha, and we'll start the new chapter. And with that, you'll see we're kind of closing up topics that we've addressed, and it's a bit of a simpler daf. Omer Adam l'chavero, halveni kor chitim, v'kotzetz lo dami. Okay, we've learned a lot about se'ah b'se'ah. You were not allowed to loan an amount of wheat in order to get back an amount of wheat. But you can loan someone. I will lend you X amount of wheat, say a kor, v'kotzetz lo dami. And we set a price. We say this is worth X amount of money. This is worth $100. And then you can return me $100. Huzlu, what if the value of the chitim went down? Noten lo chitim, you can actually give me the wheat at the lower value. Gemara is going to ask about this. This doesn't make so much sense because if we said it was $100, it should be $100. Shouldn't end up paying me $90 just because the wheat went down. So we'll get back to that soon. Huklu noten demehem. If they went up in value, then you definitely give the $100 that we discussed because you can't give the higher value of what the wheat's worth now because that would exactly be interest that we've discussed many times. Now the Gemara asks about that case, when they go down in value, why do you give them chitim v'halo katzatz? But didn't you set an amount? So why would you be giving? Why would the borrower be able to give back a lower value? If we said, I'm giving you $100 worth of wheat and you're going to give me back $100, how can you get away with now giving me 90 just because the wheat went down in value? So Amar Rav Sheshet Hachi Kamar. Rav Sheshet said this is really what it means to say Im lo katzatz, whose lu noten damav, who kul noten dameh. Really, they were talking about, this is kind of a funny case because if we didn't set them out, which actually is forbidden to do, that was the whole idea. If you're going to loan a se'ah for a se'ah, that's forbidden. But if you did it anyway, the question is, how do you collect back that money? On what basis? So now the answer is, well, whose lu, if they went down in value, then you give the exact amount of wheat that you got, even though now it's worth less, because the whole thing was you loaned wheat and now you get back wheat. And of course, there's no interest because the lender is getting back less. But but if they went up in value, then noten demehem, then you have to give the value they were at the time of the loan so that there's no interest. New Mishnah. Lo yomar adam lechavero haveni kor chitim v'ani aten lecha legoren. You can't say, give me a kor of chitim, and this is exactly se'ah, and I'll give it to you in the time of when we go to the threshing floor, when the price might go up already. Aval omer lo, but you can say, halveni ad she'yavo bani o ad she'emtza maftech. We made reference to this a few times. You can say, loan me until my son comes, because my son can open, he has the access to where all my wheat is. Or loan me until I find where the key is, because it's locked up. And then it's because you have, remember we've talked about this a bunch of times, that because you have wheat, it's as if you're returning them the wheat right then and there, even though you're not. Hillel osir. Hillel says you still can't do this. He was very strict, and we'll see he's strict about another thing coming up. He said, no way, no how, can't lend se'ah b'se'ah even if you have wheat. Now again, this we learned you can do, but Hillel actually disagrees. Furthermore, you would say, lo talveh isha kikar lechaverta ad she'ta'aseh hadamim shema yukul chitim v'nimtzeu ba'ot lidei ribit. This is crazy. Hillel also would say, it sounds crazy, that, but we'll see, we'll talk about this in a minute. A woman shouldn't lend a loaf of bread to a friend because, right, how often do we constantly loaning things to people? Because until you say, I'm lending you this piece of bread, which is valued at $2. Shema yukul chitim v'nimtzeu ba'ot lidei ribit, because when you return, if I loan you a piece of bread, and you return me the bread, it might go up in value. The price of grains might go up. The price of bread might go up. And then it'll be repeat. So Hillel is very strict here about doing this. And you have to be wary. They're saying just about simple things like lending food to friends. If the price might fluctuate, you'll end up doing repead. I'm Rav Huna. So now comes the Gemara. Rav Huna says, when we say you have to have the grains in your house, and if you have it in your house, then you can do se'ah b'se'ah. He says this means yesh lo se'ah loveh se'ah. If you have a se'ah of grains, then you can borrow a se'ah of grains, but only if you have that amount in the house. Whatever amount you have, against that you can borrow. Sa'atayim loveh sa'atayim. You have 2 se'ah, you can borrow 2 se'ah. But Rabbi Yitzchak omer, afilu yesh lo se'ah loveh alav kama kulim. Rabbi Yitzchak says you can have a se'ah, and with that you can do many kulim, okay? Meaning, there's, I think, 30 se'ah in a core, if I remember correctly, the amounts. If I don't, I'm wrong, but maybe it's 60, I think it's 30. In any case, the point is, you can have just 1 se'ah, and against that se'ah, you can borrow a ton more, okay? And that's this big question why this is. Does it mean that basically we allow you to do many kolim, but kind of borrow 1 se'ah at a time against the 1 se'ah? So each time you say, oh, I'm borrowing this against the se'ah in my house. So I'm borrowing this against the se'ah in my house. And then you kind of have to do it in separate installments. Some people say, no, it's really just symbolic. The idea is that you have a core, and because you have a core, it's as if you have a se'ah. It's as if each se'ah of the kolim that you're borrowing is made up of many se'ot, and it's viewed as if each se'ah within that core is against the se'ah that you actually have in existence, and therefore this works. So we have 2 approaches, but which way it works, we actually hold like Rabbi Yitzchak, which is interesting, that we're very lenient here. You don't actually have to have the whole amount in your possession in order to allow this. Tani Rabbi Chia l'sioi Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, so now Rabbi Chia brings a bright to support Rabbi Yitzchak. Tipat yayin ein lo, tipat shemen ein lo. Says here, okay, this Braita says if you don't have a drop of wine, you don't have a drop of oil, which seems to imply hayesh lo loveh. It sounds like if you have a drop, you can actually borrow against it. Kama tipin. You could, right? No one's going to borrow a drop. So obviously we must mean you're borrowing a lot of drops, and that works as long as you have 1 drop in your house. Hillel osir. Am Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel halacha kedivrei Hillel. Very interesting. Hillel says se'ah b'se'ah doesn't work even if you have wheat in your house. And Rav Nachman says that Shmuel actually holds like Hillel against what we've been learning. And the Gemara, in fact, points out, leitel chatak avate, but we don't hold like Shmuel, who paskins like Hillel. Women shouldn't loan out. So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, zo divrei Hillel. Here in this statement, Rav Yehuda quotes Shmuel as saying, well, this is Hillel. It seems clear that Shmuel doesn't hold like Hillel in this case about lending out food to your friend. Aval chachamim omrim lovim stam uporim stam. This stuff is very insignificant. Probably if you loan a loaf of bread to your friend and they return you a loaf of bread in a few days and the price has gone up, chances are you don't really care about that. That's a very insignificant amount. And therefore, it's unlikely that this just doesn't count as repeat, because we assume that the person who gives the extra money is not giving it as interest. They don't even notice the difference. And if they do, they don't really care about it. It's so insignificant. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, another statement. So this is our 3rd statement. The first statement we had in the name of Shmuel was quoted by Rav Nachman, and he said we hold like Hillel on the se'ah b'se'ah even if you have wheat at home. Then Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that the rabbis disagree with this point about Shmuel, about the woman not being able to loan her friend food. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, 3rd statement, b'nei chabura hamakpidim zal zeh. If you have people who are living together who share their food, but they're very careful about it. Oh, this is mine, and we share a box of pasta. When we make the food, I make sure that I get half the box and you get half the box. Okay, it's not exactly a friendly roommate situation to be in, but if you have people living like that who are very careful about everything, there are all sorts of potential halachic problems. Ovrim mishum midah umishkal umishum minyan. Now we're talking about Shabbat issues. You shouldn't eat together on Shabbat, because you're going to start weighing, measuring, counting everything you eat, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. You can't weigh things, measure things, all that on Shabbat. So we're worried about that. Umishum lov'in upol'in b'yom tov. And you can, right, and this is because, sorry, I didn't continue. Not only, right, we're worried about midah, we're worried about mishkal, we're worried about minyan, we're also worried about borrowing and paying back on Yom Tov. Okay, now, The assumption here is, the concern is that you might lend something to someone, like you might lend some bread to someone on Shabbat, and then you're going to insist on writing it down because you're so careful about everything. It's like people who lend books who won't lend a book unless they write their name in it. So they shouldn't lend books on Shabbat because maybe they'll want to write their name in the book because they're very worried that somebody won't return it. So here they say Yom Tov. This is all Yom Tov. It's also an issue on Shabbat. I don't know why it only says Yom Tov, but it would be equally an issue on Shabbat. And according to Hillel himself, even repead is an issue. In other words, even on a regular day, you can't loan people items because you're going to be so careful. You're obviously not one of those people who doesn't care. And if the price fluctuates, what will happen? You'll end up getting more back, and that's forbidden. But Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Here's a really fascinating statement of Shmuel in a very interesting way to talk at the end of this chapter, where we've been so careful about repead and any little thing could potentially count as interest. Comes Shmuel with a big statement. Talmidei Chachamim mutarim lelvot ze mize beribit. Torah scholars can loan each other money with interest. This is a crazy statement. Really crazy. What do you mean? Just because you're a Talmid Chacham? It's forbidden by Torah law. How could you possibly do this? My taima. Well, the reason why, what's the reason? Talmidei Chachamim clearly know that repead is forbidden. Now you might say, so does every other Jew, right? It's a pretty basic thing that you cannot take money on interest, or at least, right, most Jews know this. Since they know that it's totally forbidden, and we're going to have to say, why is this only Talmidei Chachamim, and perhaps even what type of Talmidei Chachamim, they know that they're just giving a gift. So if you give money back on interest for a loan, right, or you loan someone money on interest and they give it back to you, the interest, you're allowed to accept it if they're a Talmid Chacham, because we assume that they know it's forbidden and they're giving it to you as a gift, and therefore it's not interest, and they're wholeheartedly giving it to you as a gift. Now, some people say that this is only Talmidei Chachamim of the highest stature, because the average Talmidei Chachamim is probably no different on this issue than an average Jew who knows that repead is forbidden, and therefore this is only okay for somebody who is a real serious Torah scholar who will be extra careful to make it clear that this is only a gift. And there's a whole real debate about this. Some people, right, this, because this is really crazy. And in fact, I'll go on a little more and then we'll talk about what the Rishonim do with this. Amar le Shmuel Avuad bar Ihi said to this person whose name was Avuad, the son of Ihi, Halveni mea pilpilim b'mea ve'esrim pilpilim. Loan me 100 peppers and I'll give you back 120 peppers. V'arich, and this was fine. This again is a crazy statement. So Shmuel basically borrowed on interest from this Ihi bar Avua bar Ihi. And the reason was because Shmuel was extra careful to make this just as a gift. Now this seems strange. The language sounds like he says, loan me 100 peppers, 420. That's as ribik tzutza as you could get. He said it from the beginning. So most of the commentaries think that that's just the words of the Gemara saying that he did it for 120, but not that he said it from the beginning. And the Shmuel just gave it a gift at the end, and that it wasn't really part of the arrangement. Anyway, they try to get around it because it's really quite complicated and hard to figure out. If you look at Tosfot or Matana Ba'al Muhu Dekayave, Tosfot says near dafka davar mu'at. Now we start getting the Rishonim who say, wait. We're going to limit this whole thing about loaning on interest. Tosfot says we're talking about things like we were just talking about the women loaning out bread and things like that. That's what we're talking about. You can loan on interest, small things, okay? But your dad belibo. But even that, only as Talmid Chacham, everyone else should steer clear from these very small amounts of extra interest. Like I said, some people say it's only a Talmid Chacham who's of a high stature. Some people say it's only food and not other things. Okay, so there's a big debate about how exactly to relate to this whole thing. Amarav Yehuda Amarav. Mutar lo l'adam, another really crazy statement. A person is allowed to loan to their children on interest to have them taste what it feels like, to see how bad repead is, how painful it is to borrow money and have to pay back more money. So as a din of chinuch, you're allowed to do something which is crazy, that's forbidden in order to educate your children. But the Gemara says, Vilav milti, this is actually a really bad idea. mishum da'ate lemisra, because you might cause them to get them used to this. And they might then think, oh, this is, it's okay. And maybe some people say that maybe you should also have them borrow, loan you money on interest so that they understand what it's like to gain interest and then see how, then when they keep the mitzvah, they realize, wow, this is so tempting. And yet I'm going to keep the mitzvah anyway. And that would make a little more sense they get used to it. They get used to taking money on interest, and then you're going to get them used to that. And it's going to be a problem, but perhaps maybe they'll get used to it and they won't realize how bad it is. Anyway, it's a bit of a strange thing to think about. The commentaries say, obviously, we're talking about someone whose children's money is really their own and is really the parents' money, and they're eating in their children are dependent on them financially, and that's why this would be okay. If their children were independent, it obviously would be an interest problem. The original statement of you should do this. And not just we saw some statements quoted in the name of Shmuel. This is Rav Yehuda quoting Rav. Rav Yehuda studied both with Rav and Shmuel. Right? First with Rav, then when Rav died, he went to study with Shmuel. New Mishnah. Omer Adam l'chavero, nakeshimi ve'nakeshimach. You work for me today, weed my stuff, I'll weed your stuff tomorrow. Ador imi ve'ador imach. You hold my stuff today, I'll hold yours tomorrow. Below yomar though, but you can't say, that's okay, but you can't say nakeshimi ve'ador imach. You weed my stuff today, and tomorrow I'll hoe your stuff. Because that's called waiting. You're kind of getting something. I'm giving you my work. I'm holding off my own work for myself. And then I'm getting back something that potentially could be valued as more. Because once they're different actions, they could be valued at different amounts. Or adorim and akeshimcha. Or I'll hoe for you today, and tomorrow I will weed for you. Kol yamei garid echad. Now, when we said before about I can hoe for you today and you'll hoe for me tomorrow, if it's the same action, we can do it. But days are different. People worked in those days. They didn't work 9 to 5. They worked the days of the sun. When the sun rose to when the sun set. Now that changes by the day. So theoretically, if I hoe for you one day and you hoe for me a different day, a month later, could be one day will be longer and one day will be shorter. Or will be. If it's a difference of a month, definitely one day will be longer, one will be shorter. So the Mishnah states here that all the days of the summer and all the days of the Riviyah, when it's raining, the rainy season, lo yomar lo charosh arachat, meaning even if some summer days are longer and some summer days are shorter, all the summer days are considered the same. So if any day in the summer you hoed for me, I can hoe for you a different day in the summer, even if it's potentially a longer day or a shorter day. And likewise in the winter months. Lo yomar lo charoshimi begarid v'ani achoshima imcha beriviyah. But you can't say, you do it for me in the summer and I'll do it for you in the winter, because one is gaining more than the other. Rabban Gamliel omer, and this is something we learned about before. Yesh ribit mukdemet v'yesh ribit meucheret. Okay, there's ribit that's before the loan and there's ribit that's after the loan. Ketzad. Natani nav l'levot himenu. I wanted to borrow money from you. I send you a gift and say, listen, I'm giving you this gift so that you loan me money. That's forbidden by rabbinic law. Zohi ribit mukdemet. We saw this when we talked about which ribit can you collect in the dayanim. Rabbi Elazar said the dayanim can enforce returning ribit, but not ribit meucheret and not ribit mukdemet, because that's only by rabbinic law. If I borrowed from you and then I return the money, and then I sent you and I say, I say, oh, here's a gift, or here's some extra money, because you let me have your money for so long. That's ribit meucheret. And those are both forbidden, even though it wasn't part, it's not ribit tzutza, we didn't agree so from the beginning, and it wasn't exactly as part of the loan, but it was still connected with the loan, it's a problem. Rabbi Shimon omer, yesh ribit devarim. This is really interesting. Lo yomar lo, there could be ribit in words. If you loan me money, I can't say to you, da ki ba'ish ploni mimakom ploni. I can't say, well, now that you loan me money, I'll give you some information that you're interested in. This guy just came to town and I know you really want to know this, so I'm going to tell you this because you loan me money. Now, if I would have told you anyway, it's fine, but I can't tell you something specifically as kind of a reward for the fact that you gave me money to borrow, because that's called ribit. How we know this, we're going to see in the Gemara. Ve'elu ovrim below ta'aseh. Now we're going to get to, again, this is all review of things we saw, because as things unfolded, they quoted other Mishnayot in the chapter. These are the people who transgress a negative commandment. Hamal ve'vahalo ve'ha'arei v'ha'idim. The lender, the borrower, the guarantor for the loan and the witnesses. Chachamim umrim afas sofer. The rabbis say even the sofer who wrote the contract, of the scribe, ovrim mishum lo titain, umishum al tikach mito, umishum lo tielo kenoshe, umishum lo tisimu lav neshech, umishum lefnei ver lo titain mechshov v'yareitem Elohecha ani Hashem. Okay, these are all the lo tases. Lo titain, we'll see later who transgresses which ones, but don't ekaspecha lo titain lo beneshech uv'marbit lo titain ochlecha. Okay, so don't give money on interest. Al tikach mito neshech v'tarbit. Don't take neshech and tarbit from someone you loan money to. Umishum lo tielo kenoshe. Okay, don't v'lo tisimun alav neshech. Okay, don't go collecting money. Okay, don't be like a difficult collector. So by collecting more, that's a difficult collector. Although we're going to learn something else from this pasuk later. And lo tisimun alav neshech, which is in that same pasuk, is don't take interest. Don't put a stumbling block, because if you're the lender, then you're causing the borrower to fail. Also in this mitzvah, if you're the borrower, you're causing the lender, and you're getting witnesses, and you're causing them, and the sofer, and so on, and the guarantor. Tanya. Okay, now the Gemara starts off with another bright. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, if I don't normally speak to you, I don't say hello to you on the street, and then I borrow money from you, and all of a sudden I say hello to you on the street. That is interest bidvarim. That's a problem. Crazy thought. Where do we get that from? Because the assumption is, I guess, that saying hello to someone on the street is something valuable, and therefore I can't do it if you loan me money just because you loan me money. So that would be interest. Talmud lomar neshech kol davar asher yishach. This is a pasuk in Dvarim Kaf Gimel. Lo tashich la'achicha neshech kesef neshech ochel neshech kol davar asher yishach. So what do we learn from kol davar? Davar, dibur, speech. Okay, just like we have with the ona'at dvarim with speech. Afilu dibur asur. Ve'elu ovrim. Now we're going to say, Amar Abaye, okay, and these are the people who transgressed all these negative commandments. Malva over bekulam. The malva is forbidden for all those. All of those address the creditor, clearly. Love over mishum lo tashich la'achicha, ula'achicha lo tashich. The psukim that talk about lo lashich, okay, which basically means we're going to say lo tashich, the way they understand it is don't give neshech. Neshech is interest. Lo tashich is don't give interest, even though really it's not the literal translation of the pasuk, but you could see these psukim could also relate to someone who's borrowing the money. The lifnei ver lo titei mechshol, also they're causing the malveh to stumble because they're borrowing the money. Without them, the lender wouldn't be loaning the money and wouldn't transgress. The only transgression that they commit, the witnesses and the guarantors, lo tisimun alav neshech. Don't put upon. So you're doing something that's helping to put upon this loan to make this loan happen. Tanya, another brighter. Rabbi Shimon Omer, this is a statement to basically discourage people. You obviously think that if you take money on interest, you're going to gain. That's why you're doing it. You're giving money to get more money. And now the Gemara says, well, you're not going to gain. You're going to lose more than you're going to gain. What does that mean? Right? Basically, God will punish you. This is a euphemism. Literally, it means you're making Moshe into a chacham and his Torah is emet. Basically means the opposite. You're mocking Moshe Rabbeinu. It's like you're saying to Moshe, had Moshe known how much a person could make money off of this, he never would have forbidden it. He would have seen how much value there is. And that's what people who take interest are doing. They're basically mocking the Torah. Kiata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, he said, how do you know that if someone owes you money and you know that he doesn't have the money or she doesn't have the money, you can't just go to their house and say, give me the money. This doesn't have to do with interest. This is if I know you owe me money and you don't have the money to pay, I know that. It's forbidden for me to even go near your house. That's a pasuk we're going to learn. I said we're going to learn this from this pasuk something else. Talmud lomar, this is one of the things listed. Lo tielo kinoshe. Okay, this is a pasuk actually not talking about interest. The second part is, the first part says, Im kesef talveh et ami, when you loan people in our nation. Money, et ha'ani, the poor person with you. Lo tia lo kinoshed. Don't be, right, a mean collector, basically. Like, don't go in their face when they don't have the money to pay. That's what they learn from this pasuk. Then it says, Lo tasim alav neshech, also don't take interest. But the first part really is just saying, don't bother them to give the money back, or don't even go near them. Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Damar Travayo, Ki'ilu Dano B'Shnei Dinim. If somebody does this, we're going to judge you. It's like you're going to be judged by water and fire, by two things, like get destroyed by water and fire. How do we know this? Shenema. Here, kafta enosh l'roshenu, banu va'eshav v'mayim. And the way they understand l'roshenu, Rashi says, l'roshenu kirash, the lashon noshe is translated as kirashia, which is like roshenu. And so therefore, there's a reference in this pasuk. It's a pasuk from Tehillim. There's a reference to interest, and it says banu be'eshu b'mayim. Okay, you're basically devouring the person who you're trying to collect the money from. You're like devouring him with water and fire, and therefore the punishment for you is you'll be judged with water and fire. Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav, kol shmi sheyesh lo ma'ot u'malveh otam shelo be'edim. Here's another issue. This is a really interesting issue. Right? This stuff is very fascinating and very interesting in terms of, like, we're finishing up this topic and you see all of a sudden they're kind of doing a zoom out and perspective on the whole issue and getting into also all sorts of ways. Number one, we saw that maybe potentially is even permitted in certain cases, and also all the dangers of repeat, giving a more philosophical. Right? It often happens at the end of a sugya, we get a little bit more philosophical. This is a good example of that. Anyone who has ma'ot u'malveh otam shelo be'edim over mishum lifnei iver lo titen mechshol. Now we're going to take lifnei iver to a different place in the loan. If you loan money without witnesses, I loan you money and I don't bring witnesses. You might think that's a nice thing. No, it's a terrible thing. I actually could cause a stumbling. It's like putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Why? Because it's very strongly tempting the person I loan money to, let's say I loan you, to come and lie and say this never happened. So therefore, it's my responsibility to make sure there were witnesses, not just to protect myself, but to protect you from sinning, from lying. Reish Lakish omer, it's really to protect yourself. Gorem klala latzmo, you cause a curse to come upon you. Why? Shenemal, because of this pasuk. Okay, now we're quoting a pasuk from Tehillim again. Te'alemna siftei shekel. They say that the mouths of those who speak falsehood should be sealed, should be silenced, like you won't be able to speak anymore. Hadovrot al tzadik atak, those who say bad things about tzaddikim. And what does this have to do with it? Well, it goes like this. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? When we think about, like, loan sharks, for example, right? They're always considered the bad guys. And if we have a case where I claim you owe me money and there weren't witnesses, and you say, what are you talking about? You never loan me money. People are going to side with you. You're the underdog. They're going to side with you. And they're not going to side with me. And then they're going to claim I was lying. And then they're going to bring this curse upon me, which is silence will be the voices of those who lie. And then, right, I won't be able to speak. Again, it's not necessarily that, but basically you're bringing a curse upon yourself. Amar le Rabbanan le Rav Ashi, kamakayim Ravina kol ma da'amar Rabbanan. Rabbanan said to Rav Ashi, wow, Ravina does everything the rabbis say. So Rav Ashi thought, you know what? Maybe I should try to trip him up. Let's see if he'll fall into this trap. Shalach le bahade panya demale Shabbat. This is great. He goes to him, Erev Shabbat. We all know Erev Shabbat, close to the late afternoon. Everyone's busy getting ready for Shabbat. He thought, I'll get him to be distracted then, and I'll make him fall. Okay, how so? Right, I'll trap him, see if he falls for my trick. Lishadir lemar asara zuzei. Says, I want 10 zuzim. Because an opportunity came up right now to buy a small piece of land. I need 10 zuzim. Can I borrow? So Ravina says exactly like he's supposed to. Sure, just bring someone to write it down. So we have a document. Rav Ashi says, what? Me too? What, you don't trust me? He was trying to have him fall into this trap of not writing up a document. Shalach le, Ravina does not fall for this trap, and he comes back with a great comeback to Rav Ashi. Kol shekemar, all the more so for you should I write this down. Ditarid begirse, and therefore mishtale. You're very busy with your learning. You're going to forget about this. Your head is always in the books. You don't remember anything, outside of the Torah, the world of Torah. V'goreim klala, that's me. You're going to forget about it. You're going to deny, right? You're going to forget about it. And then I'm going to want to get my money back. and people will believe you, and you say, what are you talking about? And I will end up getting a curse. So here, Ravina did not fall for Rav Ashi's trap and didn't want to do this loan without writing it down. Tanu Rabbanan. We end this chapter with Shloshat Soakim ve'enan ne'enim. There's 3 people who scream out and their prayers are not answered. What is this? Eluhain, and this basically we're going to see these are 3 people who basically cause their own destruction and they have no one to complain to. That's really what it means. They could pray to God and they're not answered because they brought this upon themselves, right? The assumption here is if some terrible thing happened, it wasn't your fault. So, you can, maybe your prayers will be answered or, God will listen. But if you cause this to yourself, well, then we can't help you. So what are these? The first one is our case. It's your fault. You loan money without witnesses, you're tough luck. Now that you can't collect your money, well, that's your problem. Hakoneh adon la'atzmo. Okay. We're not going to know yet what this is, but it means you acquire a master for yourself. We'll get to this soon. If your wife rules you, okay, like you chose your wife, it was your fault for choosing a wife who's basically runs your life and tells you what to do. Rabbeinu Hananel says we're not talking about just a wife who tells you what to do, controlling wife, but what we're talking about is a wife who you married for her money. It's very interesting, connected maybe with this idea of money and repaid and wanting money, is you married her for her money, and now basically because her family was wealthy, now her family basically tells you what to do, and you're subjugated to them. Okay, that's an interesting line. What is this? Some people say you basically right? You say you don't want people to borrow money from you, so you say, oh, you think I'm wealthy? Oh, all this money belongs to some Gentile. Well, what's the problem? The Gentile is going to then come and claim, right? You're lying. Gentile's going to say, oh, you said it's my money, and now maybe they'll bring witnesses, false witnesses, and they'll be able to take the money from you. And then basically you brought that upon yourself. You were trying to avoid people borrowing from you. You lied, and then it caught up with you. Some people say, so interesting. You bequeath all your money to your children in your lifetime, and then you're dependent on them for money, right? It's not the smartest plan. You have to ask them every time you want to spend a penny, can I have the money, right? Not a smart plan. So basically, both these cases, you have someone who now basically rules you, either that Gentile or your children. Some people say, and this is a little harder to read into the words, some people actually think it's a 4th thing, and that makes a little more sense of this category of 3 people who scream and God won't answer. You're having trouble with business in this community, and you don't go to another city. Like you don't try to help yourself. Sometimes we get stuck in a bad situation, and we don't know how to get out of it. And you just kind of get stuck there and in a rut, and you don't pull yourself out of it. Like sometimes there's solutions, there's ways out. You have to find a way out. And if you don't, well, it's your fault for not finding a way out. And with that, Hadran is usury. And with that, we finish the 5th chapter. Now we're going to move on to a very interesting chapter all about business relations. Okay, it's going to be a little simpler than Ezu Neshech with all these concepts of repeat that were not so simple. Now we're going to talk about hiring workers. And what if I renege? What if the workers renege? What if, okay, all sorts of what ifs and who's responsible. Okay, you hire a worker. There's all types of workers. There's omanim, there's a Shiur, there's somebody who works for the day. There's usually an oman is usually someone who does a project, like you bring something to the dry cleaners and they clean your shirt. It's not like they work for you for the day. You pay them for a job. But Tosfot says here, we're not necessarily distinguishing here. You hire someone to do something for you. It could be a day worker. Now, we don't know yet what this is. The Gemara is going to have to figure this out, but somehow they tricked each other, or one tricked the other. We don't know who tricked who. The only thing they can have is a complaint. In other words, they can't get more than a complaint. Okay, we're going to get to this. What exactly is the complaint? What did they do wrong for each other? We don't know exactly. This first line is very unclear. We'll have to wait till the Gemara. You hired a donkey rider or a wagon driver. Okay, kadar usually means a potter. Tosfot says it's karal from the language of karon. Rashi also says it's a karon. He doesn't say you change the word, but he does say the kadar is a potter. But here it would be maybe because a potter moves his wares in a wagon. Not so clear, but it seems to be more like a wagon driver. Lavi praiparin v'chalilin l'kala olameit. And that's why it seems like it's a donkey rider or a wagon driver who's basically going to bring praiparin or chalilim. Okay, praiparin, Rashi explains, are eitzim, very nice wood pieces in order to make this bed, this seat for the kala. They would bring the kala out in a big chair. Remember, we had recently the Rebbe was carried around on this apirion, so that's going to be the same thing here. And chalilim and music for a kala. You hire people to work at your wedding. Okay, basically you hired a worker to be a juggler at your wedding. Olamate, or they also would sing. They would have these lamentations for people when they died. So you hired someone to do that for funeral. Now, both these things are timely. Okay, now if somebody doesn't show up on the day of your wedding when you hired them to be the juggler at your wedding, that's a loss that you can't make up because the wedding's over. Nothing you can do. Or poalim laha'alot pishanom mishcha, or you put your flax into soak and you hire workers to take it out. And if you don't do that, it's going to get ruined. So this is what we're going to call in the Mishnah in a second, davar ha'aved, something that there's a loss. It's not like they just didn't do the work and someone else could do it tomorrow. V'chol davar ha'aved, okay, and anything else that's a loss. V'chazru behen, and then they said, I'm not coming, not interested in the job. Okay, and they leave you last minute high and dry. Makom she'ein shamadan, if there's no one else there. Socher alehen, okay, if there's no one, we're going to have to assume no one who would do it for the same price that you worked out. Socher alehen, you can hire workers for more money and make those workers pay the difference, right? Because last minute you're going to have to pay higher prices. Oh, mat'an, or you trick them. Okay, we're going to see tricking them could be like offering them you're going to pay them more money and you don't really. Okay, so if they cancel on you last minute, you're like, listen, I'll pay you double. You don't actually have to do that. If you hire workers and they renege on you and they just don't show up to work, so they have the lower hand. Okay, so that means if Rashi says, if the price went up for workers, right? And now you have to hire new workers for a higher price because the rate is higher. You're going to have those workers pay the difference. Okay, that's for now. We'll finish this Mishnah up tomorrow. What if the Rabbanit changes his mind? Because it's not just the workers, right? It could be the Rabbanit hires workers and then says, oh, I don't need you to work for me. What about them? They were expecting to get paid that day. So we'll talk about all this as we go on. Okay, quick review of today's stuff. We start with the case of loaning money for, right, loaning grains and setting it at a set price, right, which removes the problem of se'ah b'se'ah. And then we had that we said you could do this also, you could do se'ah b'se'ah as long as you have chitim at home. And then we had a whole debate, how much do you need to have, the same amount, or do you even have less and it's just symbolic? We had Hillel who won't allow it at all. We had Hillel who said don't lend bread to your friend. And then we saw all these statements of Shmuel about this. Do we hold like Hillel, right? What about people who are very careful and don't, right, and measure and weigh everything, right? So it's a problem to eat together on Shabbat, and it's obviously also a problem to loan money because of the interest issue. Whereas, regular people, when it's such a small amount, they'll say, oh, I don't really care, right? It doesn't bother me. I'm happy to give it to you as a gift and not as repeat. And then we had this whole thing. The Talmudei Chachamim are actually allowed to do repeat because they know that they have to give it as a gift and they know how to do it in a proper way. Which raised all sorts of questions. How exactly can we say this? Then we had, you could work for me and I'll work for you a different day, but not summer and winter days, right? You can, all summer days, yes, all winter days, yes, but not from summer to winter. We have repeat mukdemet, repeat mucheret. You want to give a gift before, you want to give a gift after. We said that was forbidden by rabbinic law. We have repeat dvarim. You can't say something as to help someone with information by providing information, right? By the way, this would be like stock advice or something. You can't do that if they lent you money because that's also repeat. We learned that from the word davar in the pasuk. And then learned about all the people that transgress the sin. It's not just the lender, it's also the borrower. It's not just the borrower, it's also the witnesses, the scribe, and the guarantor. And then we talked about the issue of lifnei iver lo titei mechshol, that you're causing other people to sin. And then we talked about how terrible it is to take repeat. We talked about also the thing about teaching your children not to take repeat by showing them, right? By actually, maybe you should loan them money on interest to see how they'll understand the concept and why it's so bad. But then we said you shouldn't do that. We talked about how bad it, what's sin, that you'll be punished with water and fire if you bother someone and nudge them to give you back the money when you know they don't have the money, that's a pretty serious offense. And then we talked about the seriousness of loaning someone money without writing it down, without witnesses, because that will cause other people to sin. It will cause the lover to sin. It will also cause you to get cursed because people won't ever believe you anyway. And then we saw that story with Rav Ashi where he tried to trip up Ravina unsuccessfully. And then we had the 3 people who basically put themselves in a terrible situation, and their prayers will never be answered because they caused it upon themselves. What were the 3 cases? One of them was ours about the witnesses, lack of witnesses, loaning without that. And then we got into Socher to Omnim, which we'll get back to tomorrow's class. With that, we finish for today, and wishing everyone a meaningful Yom HaZikaron.